resume recording for you. Authorize and facilitate PACE funding. The state law is very specific that it can only be used for energy efficiency and renewable energy measures, so not water or resiliency or just general construction. It can be used for soft components that go along with it, which we will get at a little bit later. One of the benefits and the changes is that it's affixed to the property, and it is not lent based off of the business or the individual's creditworthiness. It is the value of that property, and it's secured by that property. The other component of it is that it is paid at the same time as your property tax bill. So that's December 31 of every year, the PACE assessment's due. So that first payment isn't due for anywhere from 6 to say 36 months, as it can be put out until the following year. Right now, if your project is in development and it closes prior to September 1, it can be collected that year. If it closes after September 1, it is automatically scheduled for collection the following year. That allows you to incur savings for the implementation of those components. It's also possible that you can delay it until, an example, if you're building a new building, that you want to wait until the building is operational and you're actually accruing those savings. The value on the commercial side for PACE is the fact that it is a 20-year fixed interest rate. Commercially, it's very difficult to obtain anything longer than 5 years fixed, but that's something that PACE can do, and how it operates. So you can see here in the image, the ideal is that the payment is the same over 20 years, but you see a growing savings from the implementation of that product. So right now, Show Me PACE is an open market program, which means we work with a variety of different contractors as well as capital providers. Our board vets these capital providers, and right now we have 13 capital providers. 2 to 4 of them are interested in cannabis, and we are working on trying to finance our first project. PACE, from my understanding, has financed 1 cannabis-related project nationwide, and that is in the state of Michigan, with a couple others in tow. Hopefully we'll see Missouri get that done, and we won't get first, but we can get the most, hopefully. These capital providers really do run the gamut. Some are traditional banks, credit unions, others are a conglomeration of investors, whether it be hedge funds, insurance companies, and others. And that's why some of our 13 are unwilling to fund in cannabis, just as in the traditional banking market. But others have found and do find ways around that. As I'd mentioned, interest rate and the terms are anywhere from 10 to 20. We do say that if you're looking at finding that return in less than 7 years, it's better to find alternative. That may be different in cannabis, just as it's additional investment that is harder to come by, which Chris will get to, but it is that annual installment that is fixed for that 20 years is extremely important. The other component of the law in our process is that your project components must save more than the project itself costs. So we call that a savings to investment ratio. And that's just over the term. You look at the useful life of the product, and you look at the savings, you put those together, and that must be more than the cost of the product to put that was installed. We do require mortgage lender consent, and that is because PACE takes a senior lien position. That year's payment or any delinquent amount takes senior lien position, not the entire amount. So if it's a $100,000 PACE assessment on a 10-year PACE assessment, that's $10,000 a year. Only $10,000 takes senior lien. We did talk about the fact that it is affixed to the property, and therefore, if there's a delinquency, it is attached to that property. It must be paid just like property tax for things to be taken care of. Again, only that year's assessment or the delinquency amount, not the entire amount. An example of $100,000, not the entire $100,000, only that 10 and any arrears or penalties that are there. But because it is affixed to that property, it is transferable. So for whatever reason, it can be transferred, and that loan, that assessment can be paid by a subsequent property owner.
Chris? So on this slide, again, the determination of whether the PACE funding can be done or not, it's not done like a typical underwriting of a loan. So it's really based off of the savings or the energy efficient improvements. The great thing about this industry, and one of the things that those of us that have done PACE projects outside of cannabis, as soon as we start looking at cannabis, one of the neatest things about it is when you look at that list there, HVAC and control systems, lighting fixtures, etc. If you're a cultivator, we haven't seen a PACE project really get beyond HVAC and lighting before it uses up the sort of the PACE limit, that 25 to 30% limit on PACE funding of the build out. So it's almost as though PACE was designed for this industry. So when you look at these things, if you're thinking about your own facilities that you're building out or renovating, insulation and irrigation, HVAC, lighting, as I mentioned, those are all things as you're thinking about your budgets currently, you're thinking, wow, a good portion of what we're doing is PACEable. And even on dispensaries, HVAC, lighting, windows, those are all PACEable kind of projects. So also in terms of renewable energy, if you're doing any solar systems on your roofs or on your properties, things like that, those are also PACE eligible. So cannabis is of any industry that is PACE eligible, this is by far the most has the most potential use. Next slide. So with respect to cannabis, it's still illegal, of course, as we all know. And one of the reasons why we really started looking at PACE in this industry is, as all capital is one of the biggest constraints. And Missouri, of course, became medical marijuana legal during the middle of COVID, which made it even tougher. Cannabis has been tough in every state leading up to Missouri. Now we had COVID on top of it. What are the different opportunities to help get some capital to build out these projects, or to get capital back in your pockets? And I'll mention that in a minute. So these are typically funding sources, and there's a few funding sources that overlap from regular PACE projects over into cannabis. A few of the funding sources we found are some of the same sources that are doing other types of cannabis funding, and they want another avenue in which to provide capital to cannabis growers or dispensers or manufacturers. So we gave a brief example there that you can look at, but it just gives you an idea of total project cost relative to savings and incentive. So basically, with each project, what that example helps show you is with each project, there's an energy audit that's provided, that's performed, and that's what's used by the program to determine the amount of or whether items are PACEable or whether they're eligible for PACE funding. And that's a relatively simple project, or relatively simple addition to the whole process, and that's whether it's cannabis or anything else. So next slide. The next slide here is. All right, so to attract more lenders, one of the things about projects that have PACE within them, a lot of people ask me, so with PACE, it almost seems too good to be true. It really doesn't have a primary position relative to your primary lender, except for that next payment, just like your property tax has a senior position. PACE projects projects that have PACE embedded within them have an extremely low occurrence of default. So from an underwriting standpoint, it's a safe or relatively safe investment. A project is less likely to do poorly if it's not PACE. The data backs that up. And I mean, think about it. You're being thoughtful enough to use energy efficient inputs into your project. Those are typically businesses and leaders that run businesses well, and so the default rate is extremely low. one of the things that we like, in Avail, we're an accounting and finance firm also. We help with PACE and other forms of funding, but at our core, we're a finance and accounting firm. So things like this that are 20 years and locked in, as the chart that Josh had up on a previous slide shows you, from a budgeting standpoint, that's great. You're not worrying about 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, that amount changes. Also, a great thing about these, you're paying them nicely on your property tax bill. So it's just part of that property tax payment as a special assessment on there. So it's convenient to pay. So I have yet to see any reason in cannabis for you really not to do that. Again, so if you have, I would also say, if you have a primary lender that is uncomfortable, or if you have a landlord that maybe doesn't know about PACE or is not comfortable with PACE, I would say let Show Me PACE or let Avail, folks that work in the PACE arena, explain it to them, because we've had a lot of success once people understand what PACE is, to get them not only okay with it, but understanding the long-term benefits even for them. So I think that hits on all the major topics on this one. I'll let you take the next one, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. I do want to make one clarification. Within the Show Me PACE district, outside of Jackson County, where Kansas City is, we actually service and collect all the assessments. So you'll get your traditional tax bill, but you'll also get a bill from Show Me PACE for the assessment. So there'll be two separate ones, but their timing should be about the same. So, so as I had mentioned in the beginning, the local municipality is required by state law to opt into our program. So we asked the local community to pass an ordinance to do that. The way that we operate, though, there's no obligation or cost or even staff time associated with PACE for those local municipalities. As you can see from this map, we are not in every city and every county, but we can be. For those of you who have projects that are in a community that may not have a pen in it, you can let us know, and we will reach out to those communities and inquire and advocate for a ordinance to be passed. There is a value to PACE for the community, beyond your particular project. First and foremost is the fact that only Chicago in Illinois has PACE. All the other states around Missouri don't have PACE. It is a competitive advantage for local communities when they're recruiting companies, when they're trying to retain businesses, to be able to offer PACE as a tool to help companies reinvest into their properties. Another way is that, as you can imagine, when there is a property that is updated, when a property is assessed later on by that local community, the property value would increase, which thus should increase the tax base. On that same front, having a company stay there and be more secure in a property that is saving them more money, allowing that property owner to operate at less cost, is very likely something that is beneficial to that local community, because that company is no longer looking to move somewhere else to a newer building, more advanced. Those are things they now have at the existing property. So this is an opportunity that can be used in just about every facet. It's not just limited to cannabis and manufacturing, hospitality, a variety of other fields. We've done schools, we've done sports arenas, mixed use, multifamily, those type of things. So I did get a question from Sarah Hamilton about, on average, how long does it take for the community to pass the ordinance for PACE? Well, unlike business, politics is not 100% predictable. And it really does depend on that local community. I've had communities who pass it in a week and a half to 2 weeks after we make the request. I've had others, as an example, the city of Springfield, where it took 2 years. Now, understand Springfield was a special location. They had issues with a different provider, a different PACE provider, and their problem was with residential PACE. But in general, as long as there's no opposition, it takes most communities 2 readings of an ordinance. So they're going to first read it, and then they will give it a second read and pass and finalize. So at a minimum, you're looking at 2 weeks to a month because they have their city council meetings every other month. So that's kind of the time frame that you're looking for. Anywhere from 2 weeks to a month and a half is probably what we're looking at. So it's better to give us a heads up sooner rather than later so we can make sure that we respond.
And Josh, I think you and I have already had, just in cannabis space, 2 different municipalities in the state that that you've helped get approved for cannabis projects just in the past few months. Neither of those took very long, but again, each one of them is a little bit different. But yeah, just in the past several months, and for cannabis, we've had good success. We've had really good success getting those approved.
That is absolutely accurate. I wanted to say we've had 3 or 4 communities who were approached to pass a PACE ordinance, and the project was cannabis only. We had no other project in the background, and we were able to get that done in a good time frame. None of them took that long at all. So that's the background. That's how PACE kind of works, right? That's what it is. Pardon me. So a lot of you might be asking, all right, I'm interested. What do I need to do? Besides talking with Chris, right, who can help you understand and get everything both inside and outside of PACE taken care of. What you'd want to do is, if you don't have a capital provider, you'd want to provide a project interest form. And it says here, slide 12. So let me just run to that. So this is on our website. The link is at the bottom down here. You'll see it will have the date, the property, county, who's the contact, what type of property we're looking at, what are the measures. And again, the more detail, the better, because what we're going to do is we're going to take the information that you provide here, and then that allows us to match your project with an appropriate capital provider. Not every capital provider, as an example, is willing to do cannabis. Not every capital provider will do projects under 500,000. Some won't do solar. These are examples. So making sure you tell us, the dollar value as well as the components. Again, these are estimates. That helps us figure that part out as to who or which capital provider we're going to want to connect you with. These are other requirements that you need to make sure that you are aware of, right? That you are the owner, that it is located in one of our municipalities. If not, let us know. That you have not been delinquent on property taxes or your mortgage. You haven't declared bankruptcy. These are things that are vital for us to be able to get a capital provider to work with you. And then we do have a question from Andrew Mullins. What is the biggest challenge or concern with licensed MMJ business getting access to PACE funding? Chris, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Say that one more time. I'm having trouble with the audio.
No, the question was, what is the biggest challenge or concern with licensed MMJ businesses getting access to PACE financing?
The biggest challenge so far, it's been in a very limited number of cases, has been whether it be the primary lender not having really, it comes down to either not having the knowledge or comfort level with PACE and signing off on the PACE. And probably number 2 is that property owner, as I mentioned previously. If you don't already own the property, I would say that that landlord being comfortable with the PACE process. We've spent a lot of time at Avail, just explaining that process. I mean, that's really been the biggest impediment. The lenders, it's a surprisingly large now. The slide says 2 to 4, but now I think we're up to 6 or 7 cannabis-friendly lenders for PACE right now. So originally that was the first impediment with just a couple of lenders, but now that's really grown, and it's provided a nice additional avenue for the capital providers to invest in projects outside of your typical cannabis loans. So I mean, those are the biggest impediments currently. One thing I would also say, just structurally, that makes things easier, whether it be a primary lender standpoint or for PACE or anything else, is if you own the property, to have that property as a separate holding company just makes everything simpler in terms of the overall closing of the process. So that's the one additional thing that I would add, is have that real estate. Most cannabis firms already are doing that, but that's one thing I would add also. Good question.
And I would add that those things are not insurmountable. Lender consent, which is the first thing that Chris mentioned, is an issue whether it's cannabis or not. Mortgage holders, your mortgage holder, as someone who's not familiar with PACE, needs to be get comfortable with the value that PACE brings. And Chris or a capital provider can help with that, as well as the district. So beyond the interest form, after the district receives the interest form, we will match your application with the applicable capital provider. And if it's more than one capital provider, they'll reach out to you and they'll bid on that project. They'll let us know if they're going to bid on it. And hopefully if there's more than one, that means it's lower costs for you. But after you choose, you will make the choice of the capital provider. And it may be that you're going to leave that up to your contractor or consultant. But either way, the project would choose the capital provider. The district does not. So after you have selected that capital provider, you'll work with your contractor and the capital provider, develop an energy analysis, do underwriting, obtain lender consent, mortgage lender consent, as Chris was talking about, get that bid from the contractor of what's actually going to be done and what's the cost, and then you'll complete that final PACE application. Once all of that's done, you will provide that to the district, and the district will, within 7 days, provide you an approval and or a consideration. If there are problems, we'll work with you on that. And then once the project's approved, which we do ask the project close within 15 days or so, 10 to 15 days of your closing, is when your application comes to us. So everybody signs the contract. Those funds are placed in escrow, depending upon the size. If it's a $250,000 project with just a couple of components, that's unlikely. If it's a $5 million project, it is very likely that it will be placed in escrow. State law requires us to verify that the funds are going directly for just the PACE specific items. And so escrow is used to make sure that there's a request from the contractor and it lists specifically what components those funds are going for. At the time of closing, we will file the assessment with the recorder of deeds. Then it's on the record. None of this, it can be worked out, where none of this costs anything for you out of pocket. So your contractor, your energy analyst, the underwriting, all of this stuff, even if an architect, if you're going to that route, those soft costs can all be put into the PACE application, and those fees can be paid at the time of closing. That is a lot of that, the contractor, the consultant, these other things, architect, those are arrangements you need to make with those individuals, but PACE can cover that. There is no fee that we charge up front for an application. All of our fees are collected at the time of closing. Capital providers, their fees are all at the time of closing usually as well.
One thing I would add also that I touched on earlier that I would come back to, even if you're built out, there is a retroactive component as well. So if you're saying, boy, I've missed the boat, we've already finished building out our facility, etc. Wish I had known earlier, we can still help retroactively on those inputs. So don't rule out PACE, even if you've already built out. Definitely contact the program, contact us. We can potentially still help. And Josh, I believe is it a 3-year retro for Missouri?
So Missouri law doesn't say anything about retroactive PACE. So certain districts have certain requirements. What we can tell you for us is, as we described, your savings from your components has to be greater than the cost. Because you're retroactive, you're not going to count the savings prior to PACE. So if you installed them 2 years ago and everything had a 15-year useful life, you're only going to be able to count 13 years of those savings, not the full 15. But as long as your savings meets or the requirement, you can still do that. So a lot of times that works. You're using less of something, using less savings from one particular thing or another, which allows you to move forward.
And in the case of Missouri, not too many facilities, even the ones that have commenced, have been built out all that long ago. So it's not really a long time period that we're talking about in the cannabis arena, but that is also a very attractive component. Interest rates that we've seen so far from cannabis lenders, the term sheets we've seen, anywhere from that mid to high 5% up into the 7s, just depending on the project. So you're still talking single digit interest rates, and so right there, that probably has some people falling backward in their chairs for cannabis stuff, but that's the rates are extremely favorable for cannabis. It's a little bit lower, but although what we've been seeing over the past several months from the cannabis lenders is those rates have been dropping closer and closer to some of the typical non-cannabis PACE projects as more lenders have come on board. So it's attractive in a lot of different ways. But even if you're done building and if you've commenced, you're not out of the PACE eligibility.
Absolutely. There was a third question here. I think I answered that, but can PACE reimburse soft costs? It can, yes. And not even reimburse. It can be if they're willing to, not get paid up front and get paid at the time of closing, they can do that. But you can also put them in so that is a reimbursement. Yes. And if you're getting a rebate, which I would encourage you all to check out your rebate opportunities with the local utilities for both energy efficiency and renewable energy. Those rebates can either go to reduce the cost, the size of the PACE project, or you can keep that in and those rebates can go directly back to you. They're not required to be to reduce the costs of the PACE component, and they work well together. So a question is, have we financed any cannabis testing labs? We haven't financed any cannabis projects yet. We've got a long pipeline. We're just trying to get them, they're trying to get their ducks in order so we can get that done. I think, Chris, if you want to talk more about that, you're probably better suited.
Yeah, we've got, a bunch of them in the pipeline, like Josh said, a handful that are really close to finishing, one that we're actually working with that would have already closed actually, but then we're working with that primary lender to get them to sign off on it. That's actually the first time I've ever had that happen with a primary lender having difficulty with them. It's normally not an issue. So we would have already had one. We have a handful that we're working on for April closings, but it's a fairly long pipeline, as well as clients that are literally just starting the process with us too, and with Show Me PACE. So the timeline really depends on the documentation, that project interest form and the documentation that's needed for approval. It really just depends on how quickly that the program gets it. That's the biggest impediment of it. If things are all nice and smooth, and if having built stuff out, if you've done any development work, there's rarely anything that's 100% smooth. There's so many different things that come into play. But yeah, there's several that'll be closing here shortly, a very, very long pipeline in process. But it just depends on the documentation needs. And, you know, some folks, the one that would have been done in February or March, that group had all their ducks in a row. I mean, they had everything we needed ready for us already. So if you've done any primary lending underwriting, most of that information will overlap with what we need in terms of the inputs. Obviously, information on those paceable inputs, you know, HVAC and LED lighting, et cetera, that type of information and that type of detail comes in handy. That's one thing that requires a little bit more drill down. But, you know, long answer to a very short question, but yeah, the answer kind of, it just really depends. Also, you know, some of the projects also are depending on the client. You know, you might have a dispensary in one city and a cultivation and manufacturing in another part of the Show Me Pace district. You know, so those are all things that kind of come into play as we bundle those with lenders and let the lenders bid against each other to get as good a terms as possible. But all those things, like Josh said, there's a lot of different variables that come into play in terms of the total time that it takes.
I would, if I'm thinking of this, we're on the same note and line here, Chris. That one project that everything together in the capital provider or the mortgage lender caused some problems. That was a very unique situation. It was not specific to PACE in general, or that particular project or cannabis. So don't let that deter you. There was some outside issues there that we have been and are dealing with. All right. Are there any other questions? You can definitely find more information at showmepace.org. That is the Show Me Pace website. I'm the executive director of MEI, and we're a public policy organization on energy. And this is our website, as well as my email address and phone number. Chris's contact information is here as well. Definitely welcome questions you may have. We'll work to connect you with wherever we can.
Other questions? But definitely everyone who came on, we appreciate it. Part of, and I can speak for Josh too, being a part of helping to build out this industry in Missouri, because as I mentioned earlier, with COVID and just the typical capital constraints on cannabis, this has been a wonderful program, and I would encourage you to at least look into it. And whether it be Josh or myself, you know, we're happy to answer questions anytime.
Chris, we did have an additional question from Nate Hollander on whether or not we coordinate and support industrial revenue bonds, obtaining industrial revenue bonds. We do not. We can work with those, but we don't work to develop those. Chris, do you have?
Yeah, we do those through Avail. It's a product that we kind of helped coordinate and create. They're new to cannabis. And I think the first ones in the United States will actually be here in Missouri. So Missouri Cannabis will have a little bit of a feather in their cap, like Josh said. We weren't able to get the first PACE cannabis project in Missouri. Another state beat us to it, but in the industrial revenue bond world, Missouri will be the first state with those. It's a separate item from relative to PACE. It's just another alternative funding source. But if you have questions on anything like that, you can definitely reach out to me directly. But it's a nice additional piece for if you take PACE plus IRBs. It's a nice set of alternative funding sources in the cannabis world. Good question.
Fantastic. All right. We'll give one last call out here for folks to give us a chance, or give you a chance to ask a question. But again, we know it's a lot of new information, but check us out. Chris is a has a wealth of knowledge and experience in this, and we can definitely help you out as well, whether it's in our community or not. But definitely thank you for the opportunity again, Andrew, for allowing us to work with you and communicate to your community. Definitely think, whether you're interested in sustainability or simply saving money or finding alternative pools of funds, PACE definitely is something that can help you out and help the industry out. So look forward to working with you all. Wish you the best for the rest of your Friday and hope you all have a great weekend. All right. Bye-bye.